On my 32nd birthday, my parents drained $3.1 million from what they thought was my life savings. My mom laughed and said, "Thanks for Connor's future, sweetheart." My dad added, "You would have wasted it anyway." The morning my parents stole $3.1 million from me, my father made coffee the same way he always had. 3-level scoops. Never 2. The spoon tapped twice against the rim of the percolator. My mother sat at the kitchen table reading her phone, ankles crossed, slippered feet resting on the chair my grandfather had left her. The kitchen smelled like it always had. Dark roast and bleach and something underneath both of those things that I'd never been able to name. The particular smell of a household that has been managed, not loved. Neither of them said happy birthday. I stood in the doorway in my scrubs, keys in my hand, and I watched them the way you watch something for the last time without knowing it's the last time. "I'm heading in early," I said. My dad didn't look up from the coffee grounds. "Drive safe." My mom scrolled her phone. I drove to the hospital where I'd worked for 8 years. I checked vitals. I administered medications. I smiled at my patients. At 1:47 p.m., my phone buzzed in my coat pocket with a notification I had spent 3 years engineering. Large withdrawal alert. $100,000 processed at Heritage Trust Bank, downtown branch. I stood very still in the medroom. My coworker Desmond asked if I was okay. I told him I'd eaten something bad at lunch. I had, just not in any way he could have understood. I need to back up. My name is Eli Castellan. I'm 32 years old. I'm a registered nurse, intensive care. I grew up in a 4-bedroom colonial in suburban Cleveland. White siding, manicured lawn, a detached garage that smelled like motor oil and old paint, the older of 2 children. For almost my entire adult life, I believed the arrangement in my family was temporary, a rough patch, a period of need that would eventually resolve into something that looked more like a family, not an arrangement. That's too clean a word. A system. A mechanism, calibrated and maintained with the quiet precision my mother brought to every financial matter she touched. The color-coded household ledgers, the tax files organized by year back to 1994, the black leather notebook she kept in the top drawer of her desk that she called the family fund. From the time I was 24, I paid 78% of every paycheck into that fund. I want to be specific about what 78% means. It means I lived in a basement apartment for 5 years with a window at sidewalk level that let in exactly 40 minutes of direct light per day. It means I drove a 2008 Corolla with 190,000 miles on it and a check engine light I'd learned to ignore because I could not absorb the cost of a diagnostic. It means I ate eggs and whatever produce was marked down at the Aldi near the hospital, and I skipped 2 annual physicals because the copay felt like a luxury. Not because I didn't care, because after 78% went to my parents, there wasn't enough left to care with. My mother adjusted the percentage every time I got a raise. She'd sit me down in the den, same recliner, same reading glasses, same careful voice, and explain that with my new income, my household share needed to scale accordingly. She used that language, household share, as if I were a partner in a venture, not a son in a home. As if this were an agreement I had freely entered. I had never signed anything. I had never been told what the endpoint was. I had just, one day at 24, been told how much I owed, and I had paid it, and it had never stopped. My brother Connor got a black BMW on his 18th birthday. I was working a double in the ICU that weekend. I know I paid for the car because the month it appeared in the driveway, my mother told me my contribution for that period would be increased by the vehicle line item. She said it the same way she said everything, the way a person says a thing when they have already decided it is not open to discussion. Connor went skiing in Aspen over winter break. 3 years running. I paid for the lodge. Connor wore a North Face down jacket and Salomon boots to his first semester of business school. I'd been wearing the same wool coat for 6 winters, the lining torn at one elbow. I used a sewing kit. I let it dry overnight after patching it, and I did not think about the coat. That was the particular skill I had developed over those years. The ability to not think about things, to observe the gap between my brother's life and mine, and tell myself it would balance out eventually. That my parents were operating from some larger plan I didn't fully see. That love sometimes expressed itself as expectation. I was not a son. I was a revenue stream with a stethoscope. The thing is, and this is the part I struggled to explain without sounding like I'm making excuses for myself, I didn't leave. I paid what I was told to pay, and I stayed in proximity to people who had never once asked about my shift. Not because I was weak, because every time I got close to asking a hard question, something in me reframed it. Parents sacrifice for children, I told myself. Maybe my contribution was the sacrifice running the other direction. Maybe this was what families do, and I was the one who didn't understand it. I understand it now. I found the folder on a Wednesday in November, 8 years into the arrangement. I was in my parents' study looking for the furnace warranty. The maintenance company needed it before the technician came, and I knew my mother filed appliances alphabetically. I found the warranty in under a minute, right where it should have been, under F. On my way out, I glanced at the other tabs. Eli, my name, in my mother's handwriting. In a blue tabbed accordion folder filed between education, Connor, and estate planning. I stood in the doorway with the furnace warranty in my hand, and my heart doing something it had never quite done before. Not beating faster exactly, but beating differently, with a quality that I would not be able to name until later. Something warning. I opened the folder. My birth certificate, my social security card, a color photocopy of my nursing license, front and back. Every position I had ever held. The home health aide job at 20, the rehab facility I transferred to at 25, the ICU at St. Vincent's where I currently worked, each with the address, my supervisor's full name, my annual salary. 8 years of bank statements from my personal account, the account I'd opened in nursing school, the account my parents had never been on, and that I had never given them access to. Someone had been pulling my bank statements for 8 years. I put the folder back exactly as I'd found it. I drove the warranty to the maintenance office. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my parents' subdivision for 14 minutes. I know this because I looked at the clock when I sat down and again when I started the car, and I built every possible explanation that wasn't what it looked like. A backup copy, in case I lost my documents. My mom being overprotective. A misunderstanding I would laugh about when I asked her. I went home to my basement apartment and sat on the edge of the bed with my hands in my lap, and I tried to feel nothing. I was getting very good at that. 4 months after I found the folder, I went to my parents' Memorial Day cookout. The party was in the backyard. String lights up early for the season, the smoker going since dawn. Connor was there with 3 of his business school classmates, all of them laughing on the deck in the way that people laugh when they know they are watched and approved of. My father had made his ribs, and the bourbon-glazed corn he only made for parties. My mother was at the long table arranging name cards, entirely at ease, entirely herself. I was refilling my drink at the cooler when my uncle Brad appeared. Brad is my mother's younger brother, 58, a retired contractor from outside Akron who has never been known for discretion. He had been drinking since before I arrived. He leaned in close to me, close enough that I could smell it, with the conspiratorial warmth of someone about to share wonderful news. "Eli," he said, nearly whispering, "I just think it's so incredible what you're doing for your brother." I said, "What do you mean?" He beamed at me. "Business school. $3 million for the new venture fund, can you imagine? But your folks said your savings will more than cover the seed round. They're planning the transfer right around your 32nd birthday, when the funds mature." He squeezed my shoulder. "The whole family's so proud of you, son." I heard the music, the bass line from the speaker, Connor laughing across the yard, ice clicking inside someone's cup. I said something. I genuinely cannot remember what, and I walked to the downstairs bathroom and locked the door behind me. I gripped both edges of the sink and looked at the mirror. Right around your 32nd birthday. My savings. My funds. Spoken to my uncle at a holiday cookout the way you tell someone about a son's college fund. As if it were already decided. As if it had been decided for a long time. As if I were a vehicle through which the family's real investment in its real son would someday be delivered. My 32nd birthday was 3 years away. I stood in that bathroom and I understood for the first time, not suspected, not feared, but understood in the way you understand something when all the evidence finally assembles in one place. What I was to my parents. The folder wasn't a backup. The ledger wasn't a loan. The system had never been temporary. The son who had spent 8 years hoping that he would eventually be seen for something other than what he could generate died in that bathroom. Something colder took his place. I had 3 years, maybe fewer if they got impatient. The first thing I did, before anything else, was make an appointment with an attorney. Her name was Theodora Lynn, 44 years old, the previous decade at the Cuyahoga County DA's office before going into private practice, specializing in financial fraud and elder and dependent adult exploitation. I had found her through a forensic accountant named Philip Anders, 58, CPA, certified fraud examiner, 32 years reconstructing financial crimes, who I'd worked with briefly on a billing audit at the hospital. I remembered him as methodical and unimpressible. Those were the qualities I needed. I met with both of them together at Theodora's office in downtown Cleveland on a Thursday afternoon in December. I brought the folder contents, photographed, not removed, and 8 years of my own bank statements printed in full. I sat across the desk from both of them and told them everything. The percentage, the ledger, the raises and the adjustments, the BMW, the coat, the bank statements I'd found among my identification documents, the cookout, my uncle's specific words. Theodora listened without expression until I was done. Then she asked 3 questions in sequence without preamble. Had I signed any financial power of attorney? Had I ever shared my banking login credentials voluntarily? Had any of the payments to my parents been formally documented as loans? No, no, and no. She looked at Philip. Something passed between them. They have everything they'd need to impersonate you at a bank, Philip said. Social, state ID, employment history. Depending on what else they have access to, they might be able to establish power of attorney with forged documents. What do we need to do? I asked. Theodora folded her hands on the desk. We document everything. We move your real assets somewhere they can't reach. And we let them do what they're planning to do, because doing it is what makes it prosecutable. He walked me through it section by section in Theodora's conference room, and his voice stayed perfectly level the entire time. On page 48, He had produced a graph. My income over time, in blue. My disposable income, what remained after the household share, in red. The red line barely moved for 8 years. Even as the blue line climbed steadily upward with each raise in certification, the red line stayed nearly flat, because the extraction scaled with my income. This is not a family that was struggling, Philip said. This is a family that was optimizing. I stared at the graph for a long time. Can we use this? The DA will use it, Theodora said. What we need from you is the other piece. That was when she explained the plan. Theodora had contacted Detective Renata Cho at the Cleveland PD Financial Crimes Unit before our first full meeting. She'd known her from her time in the DA's office. She was 51 years old, 24 years on the force, the last 9 in financial crimes. When she reviewed Philip's preliminary analysis, she called Theodora and said, very flatly, that it was the most comprehensively documented exploitation case she had seen in recent memory. She agreed to be briefed in real time. She agreed to be ready to move the moment we had the act itself on record. That left one piece. The decoy account was my design. I opened a Heritage Trust account in my name at the downtown branch, an account that had no connection to my actual finances, funded with an initial deposit of $50,000. Over the following 33 months, I cycled short-term personal loans in and out of it, creating a climbing balance that would read, to any external observer, as the slow accumulation of a diligent saver. Every statement showed growth, gradual, disciplined, believable. Then I started leaving the statements where my mother would find them. I am precise by training. I positioned each statement the way I position medication doses, the right thing in the right place at the right time for the right effect. On the printer, face up, on a Wednesday when I knew my mother would be printing her own documents. Then I started leaving the statements where my mother would find them. I am precise by training. I positioned each statement the way I position medication doses, the right thing in the right place at the right time for the right effect. On the printer, face up, on a Wednesday when I knew my mother would be printing her own documents. Folded in the outer pocket of my bag on a weekend visit, where the account header would be visible if she looked. Once, left deliberately on the kitchen counter after dinner. I watched her find one that November afternoon. She thought she was alone in the hallway. She stood with her back half turned toward me, and she read the balance line, and her shoulders changed. Something relaxed in them, a subtle loosening, and her lips curved into the particular smile of a person whose calculations have been confirmed, the smile of someone who has always believed they were smarter than the people around them, and has just found further proof. She set the statement back down exactly where it had been. She never said a word to me about it. Meanwhile, my real savings, 6 years of the 22% I had kept, plus the modest investments I'd made on my own over time, moved into a professionally managed trust. Physical security key on a fob I kept in a safe deposit box at a different bank. A verbal confirmation password. A callback authentication protocol for any transaction over $500. Theodora and Philip were both listed as co-trustees. Nothing could leave that account without a chain of verification that could not be replicated from the outside, no matter what identification documents someone had access to. The real balance, by the time my birthday arrived, was $2.9 million. I set the decoy account password, Connor Venture Fund 2025. Security question. What was your first pet's name? Answer, Biscuit. Connor's beagle from childhood. A brown and white dog he'd gotten at 10 and named without much thought. The kind of answer that would make my mother feel, for the half second before she entered it, that she knew her son completely. Then I called Walter Mbeki. He was the branch manager at the downtown Heritage Trust location. 59, 25 years at the bank, the last 7 as manager. I explained the situation plainly. 2 individuals would arrive at his branch at some point in the coming months and attempt to make a large withdrawal from my account using documentation I had not authorized them to use. I told him their names and described them. I told him Detective Renata Cho was briefed on the full plan. I asked him if, when the time came, he would let them complete the transaction. He was quiet for a moment. You want us to process the withdrawal, he said slowly. I want the footage, I said. I want them on camera, completing the act with the forged documents in their hands. Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Castellan, I'll need our fraud compliance team on this, and I'll need the detective's contact information. He exhaled. But yes, we can hold the funds while the investigation proceeds. We've done it before. I thanked him and went back to work. That evening, I wrote the email to the district attorney. Subject line, formal complaint and documentation, identity theft, bank fraud, financial exploitation of an adult child, Eli C. I attached a preliminary summary. I wrote the full email, names, dates, the folder, the ledger, the 8 years of extraction, the decoy account, the bank briefing, Detective Cho's involvement, Philip Anders's report, and saved it to my drafts folder. I left it there. My 32nd birthday was a Tuesday in late April. Warm, clear, the kind of spring morning in Ohio that doesn't seem to know there's anything wrong with the world. I woke up at 5 and lay still in my bed in the basement apartment for 5 minutes. Then I showered. I made coffee. I got dressed in my scrubs and drove to St. Vincent's. My parents said nothing when I passed through the kitchen. Dad measured coffee grounds. 3 scoops, tap tap. The ritual ritual he had performed every morning for as long as I could remember. Mom scrolled her phone, ankles crossed, slippered feet on my grandfather's chair. I stood in the doorway and said I was heading in early, and my father said drive safe. Same as always. Completely ordinary. The morning of a transaction they had been planning for 3 years and had said nothing about because there was nothing to say. It was already done in their minds. The money had always been theirs. At St. Vincent's, I went through the morning carefully. I confirmed the day's patient assignments, reviewed medication schedules at shift start, answered 3 pages about drip rates before 10 o'clock. I ate half a protein bar at 11. I checked my phone every 30 minutes. At 1:47 p.m., it buzzed. Large withdrawal alert. $300,000 processed at Heritage Trust Bank downtown branch. They had gone in person. Middle of the afternoon, on my birthday. They had walked into a bank in the middle of the day and handed over forged documents and withdrawn what they believed was everything I had. That was how certain they were. That was how long they had been building to this, and how thoroughly they believed they were untouchable. I told Desmond I had a family emergency and left 20 minutes early. I drove home at exactly the speed limit. Radio off, hands on the wheel, windows up. I ran through it one final time. Theodora had the complete documentation package. Detective Cho was on standby. Walter Mbeki had confirmed the footage. Philip's report had been submitted to the DA's office 4 weeks earlier as a preliminary disclosure. Everything was in place. I parked and sat in the car for 30 seconds. Then I went inside. My parents were in the living room. My mother in her armchair, magazine folded in her lap. My father on the couch, coffee in both hands. They looked the way they always looked when I came in, comfortable, settled, entirely at ease in their home. They looked like people who have finished a task. I said, "My money is gone." My voice broke on the last word, just slightly. I had practiced this once. Someone stole everything. My mother looked at me over her reading glasses, folded the magazine, slowly, deliberately. "It wasn't stolen, Eli," she said. "It was reallocated." My father sipped his coffee. "For Connor's future, sweetheart, the most important contribution you'll ever make." They were not defensive. They were not nervous. They were not apologetic. They had moved past all of that on their way to something else. The comfortable certainty of people who have explained a thing to themselves so many times it has become true. My mother stood and placed her hand on my shoulder. Firm, maternal. "Thank you for your naivety," she said. I started laughing. Not the laughing of someone who finds something funny. The laughing that comes from a place so deep and dark it doesn't have a name. The sound of something finally breaking loose from where it's been held for too long. My parents' faces changed. The certainty moved out of them the way air leaves a room. "You think that was my life savings?" Not a question. "You just spent 33 months watching me build a decoy account. You stole $3.1 million from a pile of rotating short-term loans that I constructed specifically so you'd steal it. The real money is in a trust you cannot touch, with my attorney listed as co-trustee and an authentication protocol that requires my voice and a physical key I keep in a safe deposit box at a different bank." My father's mug hit the floor. I heard it crack. I turned my phone around. The Heritage Trust branch security camera is positioned behind the teller counter at a 45-degree angle, high resolution. At 1:39 p.m., it had recorded my mother sliding a set of documents across the desk, a fabricated notarized power of attorney, while my father stood beside her with his wallet against his hip. Both of them were smiling. "The branch manager was briefed weeks ago," I said. "He let you complete the transaction so we'd have everything on camera. The footage is already in Detective Renata Cho's possession. Financial Crimes Unit, Cleveland PD, 24 years on the force." My mother moved toward me. I stepped back. "You have until noon tomorrow," I said. "The full amount returned to that account by noon, or the email in my drafts folder, addressed to the Cuyahoga County District Attorney, with Philip Anders's 74-page financial exploitation report attached, with the bank footage attached, with 8 years of documented bank statements attached. Goes out tonight." The room was very still. My mother looked at me for a long moment. I could see her calculating, looking for the move, the angle, the thing she'd missed. There was nothing. She picked up her phone and called my brother. Put it on speaker. Connor answered on the second ring. My mother said, "There's a situation with your brother." Connor's voice came through sharp and flat. "What is he doing? He's trying to ruin everything after all the help we've given him. Tell him to fix this right now. All the help we've given him." I stood in my parents' living room and I thought about the overnight shifts at the rehab facility, the torn coat lining, the 2 physicals I skipped until a persistent cough finally scared me into one. I thought about Connor in Aspen, Connor in his North Face jacket, Connor in his BMW with the bow on the hood, and I thought about my father on this very couch saying the most important contribution you'll ever make with the warmth of someone offering a gift. I looked at my parents' faces as their real son screamed about himself from 3 states away. "Noon tomorrow," I said. I walked upstairs and locked my door. I did not sleep. I lay in my childhood bed in the small room that had always felt borrowed, and I listened to my parents move around downstairs until after midnight, drawers opening and closing. Quiet, urgent conversation I could not make out. At some point, I heard my mother on the phone. Her voice, when it carried through the floor, had lost whatever quality had always made it sound like a verdict. At 11:52 a.m., a deposit notification arrived. $3,100,000 ours. Full amount. I came downstairs. My mother was in the kitchen. Her eyes were bloodshot, the skin around them bruised looking from no sleep. She was standing slightly slightly hunched, a posture I had never seen on her before. The posture of a person who has spent a night learning the true dimensions of what they've done. "It's there," she said. "Every cent. Now call it off." I opened the email on my phone. I looked at it. The subject line. The attachment list. Anders Report Final PDF. Branch, Surveillance, 03.mp4. Bank Statements, 8. Year PDF. Cho, Statement, Preliminary, PDF. I looked at my mother. "I considered it," I said. "I really did." I pressed send. The doorbell rang 29 minutes later. I was not in the house when they arrested my parents. Theodora had told me I didn't need to be present. She was right. I drove back to St. Vincent's and finished my shift. I checked vitals and administered medications, and at 4:30 p.m., Mr. Harlan came in for his evening rounds, the sweet widower in room 412, who always wanted to tell me about his wife's dahlias, the ones she had planted along the back fence before she died. "How are they doing?" I asked. He beamed. "Third bloom of the season. She always said if you cut them back right, they just keep going." I thought about that for a long time. The criminal charges came quickly. My mother was charged with identity theft, bank fraud, financial exploitation of a dependent adult, and conspiracy to commit fraud. My father faced the same charges minus identity theft. He hadn't been the one pulling my bank statements, but he had been at the bank with forged documents in his hands, and the DA's office had no difficulty establishing his participation. Theodora filed the civil suit in parallel. The trust funds were never genuinely at risk. The $3.1 million in the decoy account was recoverable the moment the fraudulent transaction cleared, legally considered stolen property from the instant of the wire. The civil suit was about the years before, the 78%. The systematic extraction that Philip Anders's 74 pages had made undeniable. The Honorable Diane Kessler presided over the preliminary hearing. 31 years on the bench, a record of patience with complex financial cases, and no patience whatsoever with defendants who appeared in her courtroom believing their circumstances were exceptional. She read a summary of Philip's report into the record, and then set bail at a number that made the gallery go quiet. I wasn't there. I found out from Theodora by text. Bail set $900K each. Won't make it. 7 weeks to hearing. You okay? I was in my car in the St. Vincent's parking lot, engine running, the October light coming through the windshield at the low golden angle it gets in Ohio in the fall. I sat with my phone in my lap and let the warmth of it hit my face. "I'm okay," I wrote. I had put a down payment on a townhouse 2 months before my birthday. Funds from the trust, a 2-bedroom near the lake with a small balcony and a view that in the evenings turned coral and gold. The kitchen had a window above the sink that let in the morning light. I had never lived anywhere with morning light in the kitchen. The first morning I made coffee there, I measured out 3 scoops the way I always had. Then I stopped, stood in my kitchen with the spoon in my hand. I added a 4th scoop. People ask me whether I regret sending the email, whether once I had the money back, I could have let the rest go. I have thought about this carefully. The way I think about medication titrations, the way I think about any system where the margins for error are real and the consequences compound. The answer is no. Not because I am a person who needed revenge, because what happened to me was not a crime of desperation or weakness or a single bad decision. It was a system, designed, documented, maintained across 32 years with the same quiet care my mother brought to every financial matter. She had a folder with my identification. She had a ledger with my salary history. She had spent years conditioning me through silence and adjustment and the steady, cumulative message that my function in the family was to generate income for other people's lives, to accept this as normal. With the same quiet care my mother brought to every financial matter. She had a folder with my identification. She had a ledger with my salary history. She had spent years conditioning me through silence and adjustment and the steady, cumulative message that my function in the family was to generate income for other people's lives, to accept this as normal. If I had taken the money back and let it go, the mechanism would have survived, just pointed somewhere else. At someone else who was 24 and tired and working a double and telling himself it was temporary. There is a person like that somewhere, I sometimes think, paying 78% and calling it love because no one ever told him it wasn't. I pressed send for him too. 1 year later, the criminal trial lasted 11 days. My mother was convicted on all 4 counts. My father on 3. Sentencing was last month. My mother received 36 months. My father, 22, with 22 months suspended pending compliance with restitution terms. The civil suit settled in the spring. I won't share the number. Connor called me once, in April. He was finishing his MBA in Chicago. He said he hadn't known the specifics. He cried for a long time. I let him. I benefited, he said, when he'd gotten hold of himself. I know that. I'm not trying to pretend I didn't. I know. I said. A long pause. "I'm sorry, Eli. I thought about what it cost to say that. I thought about what it would have cost him not to." "Okay," I said. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully. But it was the beginning of something. The recognition that he and I had both been placed into roles inside the same machine, that he had been handed the part of the investment, and I had been handed the part of the return, and that neither of us had designed it. Maybe that's enough to start from. I planted dahlias along my balcony railing in March, deep red, because Mr. Harlan told me they were the most beautiful thing in the world, and because his wife had known how to keep them going. I cut them back every week. Third bloom of the season is just coming in. They just keep going.